Hello, today we're going to talk about stress. I have a very interesting book here, international bestseller, When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress by Gabor Mate. Um, Question: can a person literally die of loneliness? Is there a connection between the ability to express emotions and Alzheimer's disease? Is there such a thing as a cancer personality? There is a lot of scientific research in this book. Some physicians are really torn when it comes to connecting emotional issues with illness. And I must tell you that the repression of emotions, um, the bad relationships, toxic relationships, can really affect your overall health. I was amazed to find out that cancer can be linked with the inability to say no, and a lot of autoimmune diseases. If you study that person's biography, you find out a lot of trauma. You find out that they do not have the healthy relationships with their spouses, parents, co-workers. But in general, in this book, you will be able to see how different case studies can and will impact you. The case of Jacqueline Duprat, the famous musician, really impressed me. I do recommend you buying the book if you want to read more about that. But um, I think we should be open-minded when it comes to illnesses. I think that Gabor does a wonderful job in showing how today doctors are only interested in the symptoms, not so much in the causes. What do I mean by this? You go at a doctor and they ask you, do you have a headache? You have cancer or stuff like that, and they give you medicine. But how about questioning that patient? How about your emotional life? How are you interacting with your parents, with your spouse? Yes, there are emotional causes for illnesses, and sometimes when we are not able to say no to people, the body will do it for us. I will continue with a more in-depth review of this book and see you next time. Bye.
So, as I said, I'm going to do a longer review of this one. The cover is really nice. So Gabor Mate is a retired physician who, after 20 years of family practice and palliative care experience, worked extensively with patients challenged by drug addiction and mental illness. His expertise is on addiction, trauma, childhood development, and the relationship of stress and illness. This book is dedicated to the memory of my mother. summarize this book, we are going to find a lot of examples in this book of people who struggled with addiction, who struggled with cancer, and Gabor does a wonderful job in showing us the history of these patients. Um, hmm. This is not a book of prescriptions. Prescriptions come from the outside. Transformation occurs within. Prescriptions assume that something needs to be fixed. Transformation brings forth the healing, the coming to integrity, to wholeness of what is already there. I hope when the body says no will help people align with the inner wisdom we all possess. It starts with the example of Mary, a woman in her early 40s. She has been a patient for 80 years. She was diagnosed with scleroderma, an autoimmune disease. What's scleroderma? It's the immune system suicidal assault results in a stiffening of the skin, esophagus, heart, and tissues in the lungs and elsewhere. The history of Mary: she has been abused as a child, abandoned, and shuttled from one foster home to another. She had never revealed these traumas before, not even to her husband of 20 years. She is incapable of saying no. So Gabor asks himself, was the scleroderma her body's way of finally rejecting this all-encompassing dutifulness? Wow. A lot of specialists actually dismiss the fact that there could be emotional causes to diseases, but in this book you'll be amazed by this. There is even a science, psychoneuroimmunology, the science of the interactions of mind and body. And it's very true that it affects the immune system. For example, the loneliest students suffer the greatest negative impact on their immune systems, and many of us live, if not alone, in emotionally inadequate relationships that do not recognize or honor our deepest needs. Very important. In important areas of their lives, almost none of my patients with serious disease had ever learned to say no. So a lot of the conditions are caused by this inability of saying no to people. I agree with the statement said by Gabor Mate. One of the weaknesses of the Western medical approach is that we have made the physicians the only authority, with the patient too often a mere recipient of the treatment or cure. People are deprived of the opportunity to become truly responsible. Very, very true. Gabor enters a bit in his biography. He's a survivor and a child of the Nazi genocide. His maternal grandparents were killed in Auschwitz. And his mother was kind of depressed a lot of the times, and Gabor says that he learned early that I had to work for attention and to burden my mother as little as possible. Unfortunately, Mary, the patient with scleroderma, died 80 years after her diagnosis. Hmm. And there is a thing that Gabor says, I have wondered at times how Mary's life might have turned out if someone had been there to hear, see, and understand her when she was a small child. Another patient with multiple sclerosis, Natalie. She was married with Bill, and Bill was a heavy drinker and often embarrassed her. And she says, I knew within 48 hours of being diagnosed with MS that Bill would not be there for me. Living in an unhappy marriage. That's very, very bad. Excessive emotional involvement with a parent, a lack of psychological independence, an overwhelming need for love and affection, and the inability to feel or express anger have been identified by medical observers as possible factors in the natural development of this disease. Wow. Marital conflict. Wow. So, Gabor describes a lot of his patients dealing with MS, and there is a common denominator for these bad relationships. Another patient, Lois, says that a desperate need for approval had characterized her earlier life as well, especially her relationship with her mother. I transferred to him my mother always being in control of my life, telling me what to wear and decorating my room and telling me what I should do. Wow. Interesting enough, the blurring of psychological boundaries during childhood becomes a significant source of future psychological stress in the adult. People with indistinctive personal boundaries live with stress, so do learn how to set boundaries if you want to be healthy. Really interesting. So internal stress becomes repressed and therefore invisible. Therefore, this disease, it's an expression of the body that really wants to say no. If you are interested, Gabor will do a very in-depth analysis of Jacqueline Dupre, whose illness and death are a virtual textbook illustration of the devastating effects of the stress. I was utterly impressed with the story of Jacqueline, and I do recommend you this book in order to read a more in-depth detail of this one. Gabor says about her relationship with her mother, her unfortunate marriage. Jacqueline Dupre had only her cello, only her music. She was completely suppressed. Very interesting, and I didn't know that, but for those habituated to high levels of internal stress since early childhood, it is the absence of stress that creates unease, evoking boredom and a sense of meaninglessness. People may become addicted to their own stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. Wow, so you actually could become stressed that you are not stressed enough. Wow. The story of Alan. diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus. He never smoked, he never drank, but he had stress. He had bad stress, a complete lack of intimacy in his 10-year marriage to Shelley. Really interesting.
A very interesting fact is about the functional nexus formed by hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands. HPA axis. It's the hub of the body's stress mechanism. Huh, interesting. Chronic stress leaves us more susceptible to develop intestinal ulcers. Depressed people secrete high levels of cortisol. Depressed postmenopausal women are more likely to develop osteoporosis and hip fractures. So our body is an entire system, is so complex, and this is why we need to have the patience to make the link between a disease and a stress. Chronically high cortisol levels destroy tissue. Chronically elevated adrenaline levels raise the blood pressure and damage the heart. Now imagine being in a bad relationship for years, or just not in healthy relationships, and this is what is happening. The cortisol level is up. Childhood is very it's a key element in developing future behaviors. Dr. Buck points out that a child whose parents punish or inhibit an acting out of emotion will be conditioned to respond to similar emotions in the future by repression. The self-shutdown serves to prevent shame and rejection. Wow, the result would be a kind of helplessness. For example, someone who feels stuck in a dysfunctional or even abusive relationship, in a stressful job, or in a lifestyle that robs him or her of true freedom. So we learn these behaviors when we are kids. And again, we can so much relate with this, because how often have you heard, "Stop crying, you do not look pretty," or "Why are you upset? Why are you angry? You're not supposed to be like this." And this is how we teach children to repress their emotions. It's really not good. Interesting with ALS patients. In 1970, a research article by two psychiatrists points out that characteristics of this kind of patients were their attempt to avoid asking for help. Wow. The author concluded that people with ALS seem to have two lifelong patterns distinguishing them: rigidly competent behavior, that is the inability to ask for or receive help, and the chronic exclusion of so-called negative feelings. Hard, steady work without recourse to help from others was pervasive. Emotional repression, in most cases expressed as niceness, can also be found on exploring the lives of famous people with ALS. Stephen Hawking, Gehrig, Maury Schwartz. The life stories of people with ALS invariably tell of emotional deprivation or loss in childhood. ALS is an expression of a self-imposed image that needs to conform to the individual's and the world's expectations. The patients are trapped in a role. This is why I told you in the beginning how important it is to when you're dealing with disease, the disease, it's not the most important thing. The history of the patient should be. People should be asked, what happened to you when you were a child? How is your relationship with your parents? There are a lot of repressed emotions behind every disease. Wow. Disease frequently causes people to see themselves in a different light, to reassess how they have lived their lives. Sometimes, when people have a disease, they just wake up, they start to make changes. Some of them manage to heal. So, in people with ALS, when people with ALS get sick, it's their way, it's their body's way to say no, stop. It's a rebellion. So those kind of people who are always nice, always do stuff, always, they just carry the weight for other people. When they get sick, it's like, okay, I'm not functioning anymore. The body is saying no for themselves. There is a very, very detailed study of many patients done by Gabor Mate. And I really like about this book that we can find out the life stories of these people with ALS, with cancer, with autoimmune diseases. And the patterns fit, the puzzle pieces fit. They all have history of emotional repression in their life. Rage and anguish exist underneath the veneer of niceness, no matter how sincerely a person mistakes the facade for her true self. Gabor describes a patient who had a very impossible relationship with her mother. The mother was very domineering. We can see this happening today. A lot of people are afraid of their parents, although they're adults. And they let parents do the decision for them, although they have 30 or 40 years old. This is a very unhealthy pattern. There is a big talk about Stephen Hawking, about his childhood. In his biography, it is said that at the supper table, the Hawkings would eat without communication. Each had lowered into reading matter. Stephen's childhood home was in a state of physical neglect, emotional distance on the part of both parents. Hawkins regarded any expression of emotion or appreciation as a sign of weakness, as loss of control or a denial of their own importance. Strangely, they seemed ashamed of demonstrating any warmth. Is ALS caused by, or at least potentiated by, emotional repression? That it is rooted in childhood emotional isolation and loss. Wow. There are some cases of healing from such disease. And how is this happening? Funny enough, not through medical treatment, but I must tell you that Gabor does not say that you are supposed to give up treatments. No, emotional work should be done in parallel, but cases of healing have happened after people did the emotional work. A friend healed through the conscious daily practice of emotional self-inventory and of self-love that little by little unfroze each part of her body. Amazing. And I know that some doctors might shift a little when hearing this, but we can heal. Everything is energy. Negative emotions are energy, and they do affect your body. interesting. Researchers found that emotional factors and social involvement were more important to survival than the degree of disease itself. Emotions directly modulate the immune system. Um, so, if you have support, but the good emotional support when you are sick, it might matter more than the treatment or uh, the gravity of the disease. In most cases of breast cancer, the stresses are hidden and chronic. Mm. Women are more prone to develop breast cancer if their childhoods were characterized by emotional disconnection from their parents or other disturbances in their upbringing. If they tend to repress emotions, particularly anger, if they lack nurturing social relationships in adulthood, and if they are the altruistic compulsively caregiving types. In one study, psychologists interviewed patients admitted to hospital for breast biopsy without knowing the pathology results. Researchers were able to predict the presence of cancer in up to 94% of cases, judging by such psychological factors alone. Wow, so you can get cancer if you are emotionally repressed. I'm not saying that this is the sole cause of cancer, but it definitely adds up. And there are decades of research behind these statements. So this is not just a false belief. Extreme suppression of anger was the most commonly identified characteristic of breast cancer patients. Wow. Repression of anger increases the risk for cancer for the very practical reason that it magnifies exposure to physiological stress. If people are not able to recognize intrusion or are unable to assert themselves even when they do see a violation, they are likely to experience repeatedly the damage brought on by stress. You can't say no. You can't say no. You have to be nice when you should be angry. You are saying yes when you should be saying no. Again, there are case studies. For example, Anna is convinced that stress was instrumental in the development of her cancer. Her first husband, a businessman, mistreated her emotionally throughout her marriage. By the time the relationship ended, she was also being physically abused. Oh, so when you get sick, it's the body's way to say no, stop it. Uh, it's enough. I can't cope with this anymore. You are a part of this too, Mom. I must tell you, a lot of issues come from childhood. A lot of adults are emotionally repressed in their relationship with their parents. So if there is one take you should have from this book is working on your emotional relationships with all people, but most importantly with your caregivers. Cancer, ALS, and MS, and rheumatoid arthritis, and all of these other conditions, it seems to me, happen to people who have a poor sense of themselves as independent persons. On emotional level, they have a poorly differentiated sense of self. They don't know who they are. When the parent can't put in the work to maintain the relationship, then the child has to. She does by being a good girl. A lot of kids do this. A lot of kids do this. The parents are, for some reasons, just not prepared to be a parent at that point, so the kid has to parent themselves. I love the quote. Why can't parents see their children's pain? I've had to ask myself the same thing. It's because we haven't seen our own. Wow. Hmm. I really wrote this down and I will buy this. There is a wonderful feminist book by Dorothy Dinnerstein, The Mermaid and the Minotaur. It discusses how the exclusive role that women have in early child raising distorts child development. When the woman is married to an immature man, she's also a mother to her husband, so she hasn't got the openness and the energy for her kids. So your real rival for your mother's affection wasn't your sister, it was your dad. I do relate with this. Oh my god. There are so many unhappy marriages which last for decades, and I've seen that a mother that doesn't have a good relationship with the father of the kids just can't be emotionally there because she's so much consumed with the fact that her partner isn't there for her, that kids just get the short end of the stick. Hmm, interesting. Smoking no more causes cancer of the lung than being thrown into deep water causes drowning. Um, yes, emotions, strong emotions can really affect you. The single greatest risk factor for death, and especially for cancer death, was what researchers called rationality and anti emotionality. Smokers, we found that smokers had no incidence of lung cancer unless they also had a big score of emotional repression. Hmm. The results indicated that for lung cancer to occur, tobacco alone is not enough. Emotional repression must somehow potentiate the effects of smoke damage on the body. So there is this myth completely busted in this book. So you don't have to be a smoker to have cancer. And this answered a lot of my questions because when I've heard that that person died of cancer and they never smoked, never drank, they were good, nice people. Now I can understand that they were just emotionally repressed and not necessarily that nice. Hmm. Psychoneuroimmunology, I told you about it at the beginning of the review, is the name of the discipline that studies the interrelated functions of the organs and glands that regulate our behavior and physiological balance. Hmm. It is astonishing to learn that lymph cells and other white blood cells are capable of manufacturing nearly all the hormones and messenger substances produced in the brain and nervous system. Oh, everything is connected, is really connected. So consummatory behavior is behavior that removes the danger or relieves the tension caused by it. Unsatisfied emotional needs, lack of love, trigger the HPA axis. Really interesting. So tobacco smoke has a directly damaging effect on the genetic material of lung cells. It has been estimated that for the initiation of cancer, lung cells have to acquire as many as 10 separate lesions or points of damage on their DNA. DNA repairs itself or the cell dies without replicating its damaged genetic material. Faulty DNA repair is associated with an increased incidence of cancer. So, in short, for cancer causation, it is not enough that DNA damage occur. Also necessary are failure of DNA repair or an impairment of regulated cell death. Disease, in other words, it's not a simple result of some external attack, but develops in a vulnerable host in whom the internal environment has become disordered. This is a key idea in this book. So disease doesn't just happen. It's really important for us to understand. There are emotional causes. Wow. Disturbed eating habits in non-menstruating women. Troubled eating patterns are inextricably linked with unresolved childhood issues. Wow. Anorexics, for example, will often stop menstruating. Wow. In case of leukemia, episodes of acute stress in which the cortisol levels temporarily rise are sometimes enough to induce a remission. So stress affects you. Stress affects you. And it doesn't help your body at all. So this is why it's really important to just stop and analyze the life, analyze everything that happened to you. In numerous studies of cancer, the most consistently identified risk factor is the inability to express emotion, particularly the feeling associated with anger. It is a major risk factor because it increases physiological stress on the organism. The sense of hopelessness follows from the chronic inability to be true to oneself on the deepest level. The researchers were able to predict with almost 75% accuracy those individuals who had early cancer simply by utilizing a questionnaire which differentiated between various emotional states. They found out cancer was most apt to occur in those women with a helplessness-prone personality. So learn to say no. And yes, in the education of women, a lot of the times parents tell the girls, don't be like this, don't be angry, don't shout, be nice, be good. But this is what is happening decades later. People just get sick. Wow. There is a talk about Gilda. She attempted to make herself into whatever woman she thought the man in her life preferred. Gilda found it impossible to speak her emotional truth to her mother. So again, the relationship with the caregiver is really important. Only close to her death did Gilda finally learn that she could not be a mother to the world. I couldn't do everything I wanted to do. I couldn't keep calling all the cancer patients I knew, and I couldn't try to help heal all the women with ovarian cancer. I had to take care of myself. It is important to realize that you have to take care of yourself because you can't take care of anybody else until you do. This is the wisdom of a person who had to get sick in order to reassess her life. Interesting with men. By their 30s, many men will have some cancerous cells in their prostate, and by their 80s, the majority are found to have them. In other words, the presence of cancerous prostate cells is not unusual even in younger men. It is associated with issues in the marriage. Dependent men were more likely to develop a number of diseases, including prostate and other cancers. Men who are currently married compared with men who are divorced or widowed are less likely to be diagnosed with prostate cancer.
Men who were less able to experience themselves as individual, self-reliant adults had the issue. So, men who are not allowed to be men uh, develop cancer much more often. Wow. Hmm. The child of an unhappy mother will try to take care of her by suppressing his distress so as not to burden her further. His role is to be self-sufficient and not needy. So when 25-year-old Lance was given his cancer diagnosis, he was quite unable to tell his mother directly. Again, the relationship with the caregiver. Wow. I strongly suspect that repression plays a role in the onset of testicular malignancy. It would be worthwhile for someone to undertake a study in which men with the disease were carefully interviewed about how they experienced their lives emotionally. One aspect deserving attention would be the patient's level of closeness to and identification with their mothers. Wow. People pleasers, men who try to please their moms with any cost, a man who can't say no. Wow. I wonder if mothers would educate their boys differently if they knew how much disease they can cause. Hmm. There are a lot of stories of people, so if you're real interested in life stories, you will find so many patients in this book and their stories. It will just touch you. Hmm. A study demonstrated that people can experience emotional stress with measurable physical effects on their systems while managing to sequester their feelings in a place completely beyond conscious awareness. Wow. Cancer patients tend to deny and repress conflictual impulses and emotions to a higher degree than other people. Research. They are the most distant from their parents. The cancer subjects were the least able to express emotion. Hmm. Repression, the inability to say no, and a lack of awareness of one's anger make it much likely that person will find herself in situations where her emotions are unexpressed, her needs are ignored, and her gentleness is exploited. Hmm. The way people grow up shapes their relationship with their own bodies and psyches. The emotional context of childhood interact with inborn temperament to give rise to personality traits. Much of what we call personality is not a fixed set of traits, only coping mechanism a person acquired in childhood.